We've been talking a lot about Kamala's America. You wrote a book called Unhumans, and we've been talking here in this show about Kamala's America, the nightmare scenarios. In other words, if, God forbid, and I mean that from the deepest parts of my heart and spirit, somehow she was installed in the presidency, what would that look like? Not the first day, we know, the first 100 days, but in 4 years, where would we be? And so my follow-up question to that is Kamala Harris an unhuman?
Well, we'll use unhumans in the book title as a verb, actually, where essentially that is what these types of people, communists, cultural Marxists, etc., do to conservatives. And essentially, we say that they stand for unhumanity because they actually stand against humanity itself. They are anti-human. And so what I mean by that is, humanity, we want what? We want stable families, we want stable society, stable neighborhoods. And all of this would lead you towards certain policies in your life. By the way, healthy food, healthy water, healthy air, all of these things. And so when we find someone who believes in these utopian and really dystopian visions of of a future free from rule, future free from history, a future of total domination of one side, then you realize that in their view, in the view of the revolutionary, that it is conservatives, it is Trump supporters, it is pro-lifers, religious, who are all impediments to that future utopia, which they believe in, the post-revolutionary world. And so to the revolutionary, anyone who stands in the way is essentially a sort of invasive species. You're seen as something that's less than human, something that needs to be weeded out. And this is why we saw, even after 2 assassination attempts now, and we've written the new book, Bulletproof, the media, the discourse, the campaigns barely even talk about these things. It barely even comes up that you had an Act Blue donor try to take Trump's head off in Butler, Pennsylvania, and then you had a Ukrainian foreign fighter travel back to the U.S., somehow get his hands on a unregistered SKS rifle with the serial number shaved off, and is able to plant himself outside of President Trump's golf course and Mar-a-Lago. He was going back and forth right under the nose of the Secret Service, to the point now where Trump's campaign has, according to the New York Times and Washington Post, and anyone can go read it, they've now requested military aircraft and military vehicles to be able to convoy them through, because they don't just face previous assassination attempts, but also active assassination threats. And yet all of this is going on. Of course, Corey Compatore was killed, a Trump supporter who was actually murdered by this guy, Thomas Matthew Crooks, that the FBI won't give you any information on. And yet we don't talk about it as if it's like the fatal Trump rally from Butler, Pennsylvania. We don't talk about violence from the left. We don't talk about anti-Trump violence. It's not even brought up. And why is this? This is because, again, if you are someone who is seen as on that side of the aisle, you are seen as something less than human.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying because I'm reading your book, and actually I was listening to it, but I had so much work to do. I had to stop working to listen. So now I'm reading through it instead. And you're right, I was using that term differently. Kamala is looking at me as is just a cog in the wheel. I'm not really a human. I'm a consumer of food, or I'm a number, but I'm not somebody worthy, or you, and President Donald Trump, of being treated as the scriptures would tell us, that we're all made in the image of God and that we should be treated with dignity and our life is sacred. But in the case of Kamala's America, what do you see as the greatest part of the nightmare that, well, I'm calling it a nightmare. I think that if President Trump and Vice President Vance do not take the office, that we are headed to a place, that a point, tipping point, inflection point, whatever, where we cannot return, or it will be nearly impossible.
Well, this is what we face. So we've seen through the Obama administration and prior to that, the Clinton administration, really even for a large extent under the Bush administration, in terms of America's foreign stance around the world, is what should America be? This is the major question. Should America be this global empire that is predicated on the ideology of wokeness and globalism, which is really transhumanism, that we are not humans, that we are able to morph ourselves into these cybernetic creations using AI to go beyond the limits of humanity. And this is what Yuval Harari talks about a lot. This is what Klaus Schwab talks about. Are we going to be so focused on these things where we're using social engineering and social justice programs to attempt to remake society itself? And also, by the way, using the arm of the U.S. military to attempt to impose those types of new beliefs around the world. So that's one option. The other option, of course, is should America be a nation state? Should America be a place where we have prosperity, where we have peace, where we have bilateral diplomacy with our adversaries and our partners? Should America be a place where we can have clean cities and safe parks and neighborhoods where we can walk around with our children without having to fear for our lives? This is the nation state. This is the state the United States was founded as. In 1776, the United States pulled out of what was the globalist system at the time, the British Empire. The United States and the founding fathers, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, etc., they pulled out of the British global empire. And you could read Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, and which was also came out in 1776, where he talks about this. It's this great global kind of like a economic ledger of the British Empire, and talking about how they do, the spices from India, the mercantilism, all of it. And it's the U.S. that pulls out because they understood at the time, the founding fathers, that to be successful with the geographical position and with the demographic makeups and all of the resources that the United States had, that to be a nation state solely focused on its own principal concerns and the concerns of the citizenry, rather than having this far off imperial government that was all the way out in London. That's, by the way, what taxation without representation was.
Was all
That
about.
was, we don't want to obey the edicts of the global
Jack, don't you think it comes down to this,
we find
that
in America.
we want to make America great again, but a patriot in France would want to make France great again, and a patriot in Russia would want to make Russia great again. And if I focus my energies upon my business and my family, and everyone does the same thing, then everyone is building up what they know best, what they care about most, and success will be, all the boats are lifted in that kind of a sea. And if we were Frenchmen, we would want France to be successful, peaceful, prosperous, safe, and clean and free. We would want the same thing. So making America great again isn't really in the sense of we want everybody else to do poorly. We would like Chinese patriots to be doing great again and fighting against their country. Is that part of the ethic of not being part of this globalism?
Well, basically, the idea of being against globalism is that what you're saying is right. So you have a family of nations and a family of nation states that are able to work together. We're able to engage in trade. We're able to engage in bilateral communication. Obviously, there are countries the United States has relationships with, has cultural ties, familial ties, etc. There are other countries where the United States doesn't have that, and so we have more of an adversarial relationship. But that's all understood to be predicated throughout what, which is essentially what President Trump is offering through this, which is more, by the way, the classical system that the United States operated under really up until the 1980s. But under the new system, the issue is, though, there are billions and billions of dollars at stake here because multinational corporations, financiers have been able to come in, and what they would prefer under the globalist system is a system in which each country becomes a sort of economic zone, and there's a free flow of capital, there's a free flow of finance, there's a free flow of migrants. Of course, is where you see the migrant crisis. So
Like a
people who are willing
European
to work
Union
for
for the whole
less.
world.
Exactly, exactly. And so those migrants then are placed in areas of the Rust Belt. I said the other day on Twitter that they're turning the Rust Belt into the refugee belt. Why?
Mm.
Because they understand that these are socialized social experiments where they're bringing in low cost labor and subsidizing the costs, subsidizing the your housing, subsidizing your health care. That all comes on the government dime. So that's socialized. Then they're privatizing the profits from not having to pay the benefits of these low cost wages. And so this is why the corporations love this. They absolutely love being able to bring workers like this. The people who get screwed over, of course, are, your JD Vance type Americans in middle America, like Middleburg, Tennessee, or excuse me, Middleburg, Ohio, or these
Well,
places
let's
in
talk about
Kentucky,
Pennsylvania for a
Carolina,
minute.
which is hit right.
I saw you with Tucker and Alex, and I found it very, very touching. My family, my dad's side of the family, was from Warren, Pennsylvania, this tiny, adorable little town. It's up in the north of Pennsylvania with cobblestone streets. And he lived on Redwood Street. And it's just an absolutely, Norman Rockwell kind of place. I have this steamer trunk from when my family came over from Europe, and it just says Warren, Pennsylvania, and then their name, because that's how they addressed steamer trunks apparently at that time. So they go back to like the late 1800s, early 1900s. They came here, and this lovely, idyllic little American town, an American culture, an American town. You were talking about your town, Norristown, Pennsylvania, and it
Exactly.
was it hit my heart because I think it's these kinds of stories. When we talk about Springfield, when we talk about that town in Indiana, I can't remember the name of it, where these masses of Haitians or whatever other refugees are being funneled there by the federal government and maybe in collusion with some of the local, persons because of, dollar.
Oh, everybody's eating off of it.
Yeah. But if anybody doesn't understand that a little American town has a culture that's Americana, that's what that word means. Americana is compared to a little Haitian town, and that there's going to be a clash there. And what's going to happen is the American towns is going to go down here. The Haitians are going to elevate. The culture is going to go down. Tell me about your town, Norristown, Pennsylvania.
Well, yeah, and thank you. Of all the things I've written and the books that I've done, I never really considered that just telling my hometown story would becomes this sort of political issue. Also, by the way, I'm being fact checked furiously by some of the regime toadies have come out against my speech about my town, and I said, wait a minute, I'm from Norristown. We gave the speech in Reading, Pennsylvania. I think I was related to something like 50% of the people who were in the room. Everybody in the area was cheering because finally someone was talking about the things that have happened to towns like my town in Pennsylvania, like Reading, Pennsylvania, like Bethlehem, like Lehigh, like so many, like Warren, Pennsylvania, like you just mentioned, so many of these areas. And I'm just telling the story of what happened to us. And it's not even something that I worked on. It's just something that happened to me. It seems strange for me to speak about it. But so the town I grew up in, yeah, it was just outside of Philadelphia. I mean, literally within just stone's throw from the city limits of Philly and right on the Schuylkill River. And was an industrial town and, very working class. We lived in not a row home, but a twin home along a chain. And we, what can I say? My family had lived there for about 100 years after we had moved over from Poland, and we all lived in the same town, and everybody in the family lived in the town. We'd all been, actually every member of my family since we came from Poland up until my son was baptized in the exact same church, and that was just
Mm.
the local church. And what can I say? We're Polish, we're Catholic, pretty much come in one flavor
My
or
mom's
another.
Irish Catholic.
And so there you go,
Yeah.
So it's the same idea. So you go through that, and everybody got married there. Everybody got baptized there. That was the town church, and that was within. You could drive about 5 minutes, or you could walk about 15 if you really wanted to. And then you had a hospital down the road. You had a corner store, and it wasn't great. It wasn't some wonderful, incredible environment. It wasn't some like utopia or anything, but it was good. Right? It was just a good place to live, and the people that I grew up with, the kids that I played with, were the children of the kids that my father had grown up with. And we actually lived in the same house that my dad grew up in, because it had been his mom's house. And then she sold it to him, and you just kind of passed the house down, because that's what you did in town.
That's what you did.
Pass the house down when someone gets a new family. And then so Nana moved down the street, and we always loved going over her house, because she had one of those above ground pools. And so you could always walk down the street to Nana's house, and she was babysitting or something like that. And that's pretty much what it was. It was a tight knit community. And then and for us, when I remember being little, that my only measure of success, my only dream of success, was to, I don't know, live in a nicer house in my town. I couldn't dream of moving somewhere else. Why would you do it? Why would you want to live somewhere else? We have a great town here. And then you know, as the early 90s got going, though, that's when crime started roaring and rearing its ugly head in our town. Section 8 housing came in through the federal government. So those homes that I was just mentioning came in and were given to the Section 8 housing, and none of this was checked. The kids wouldn't go to school, so they were running around like crazy, completely unsupervised.
Mm.
And you had a lot of criminal element come in. Then we had the like Jamaican drug dealers coming in across the back alley from us. And at the end of the 90s, the town was given essentially what we didn't have the name for it back then, but it was given what would be called sanctuary city status now. So they began accepting as legal tender Mexican ID cards. So a Mexican consular ID card would be accepted for legal services within the town limits of Norristown. And this happens all over Pennsylvania. So, and then later they went through the more formal process of becoming a sanctuary city and all this, and not complying with federal guidelines. And of course, the city of Philadelphia has recently done so, I think within the last 5 years here, and was cheering about this. And so what happened, and you could just see the flood of criminality and the flood of illegal alien violence, and illegal aliens come in, and it completely changes the character of the town, completely changes the nature of the town. It brings down property rates. It brings down the likelihood of the income of the area, and it rises. You have the crime rate rises, the homicide rate rises. You have the rise of, again, that culture clash that you just spoke about was constantly going on. And you know, we would go to ride my bike, and then I used to be able to ride my bike to the corner, like I mentioned, that corner store, go in and, get some, I would always like to read books that were on the spindle. So I would get the, different books from there, from the drugstore, and then I'd come out and find my bike is stolen. And then like your bike is constantly being stolen. So you live through this process of being in a high trust neighborhood and a high trust environment, and watch it become medium trust to low trust, all within the span of just growing up over 10 to 12 years. And my father had talked about this before, watching it in his lifetime, just watch the town slowly be killed, and just before his eyes and before our eyes. And it broke his heart. It really broke my dad's heart to have to leave that house that he had lived in for his entire life, because he
Oh.
always planned to give that to us one day. And a gorgeous, by the way, home. I mean, this is worker housing, but everything was hardwood in there, from the railings to the floorboards, sliding doors with stained glass to take you into the dining room. And by the
Mm.
way, at the turn of the century, going into the house was built in 1900, that was normal. That was considered a normal home for a working class family back then. 3 floors with a basement, just beautiful railings and all that. And I imagine it's still there, but the crime has gotten so bad now that I haven't even ever taken my children uh, for a walk down that street, just because I don't know what would happen to them if we took them there. And so this has, and after becoming, by the way, a sanctuary city, I'll just add that I wrote a letter to the paper as a kid, basically saying that, don't do this, because I think I was a teenager when I wrote it. I said, don't do this, because you are going to destroy this town, and you're going to destroy the healthcare network and the healthcare system in my town. And they went ahead with it, and I got some responses saying, "Oh, how did you print that racist letter to the editor?" And then within about 10 years after that, my Catholic school closed. Well, my Catholic school had already closed at this point. Then our hospital, the one that I mentioned that we could walk to, where I was actually born, that hospital has now been demolished and is now a vacant lot next to a Planned Parenthood clinic. And the high school, which is at the other end of town that I went to, which is the same high school that my father went to, just finished the process of demolition in here within a couple of days from now. So we've been seeing the videos, and I've been posting a little bit on social media just to, again, be a voice to someone who watched all this happen within my lifetime, and to realize that all of this was not done. And it's, I'm not the only person who's had this story. Lots of people have had this story.
Oh,
And
yes.
these things are done by decision. These things are done by policy. These things are done by spiteful miscreants like Josh Shapiro, who, by the way, so Josh Shapiro, who's the current governor of the state of Pennsylvania, was my county commissioner prior to becoming the statewide
Really?
AG, and then he became governor. And so he wasn't the one who started the ball rolling, but you have politicians like Josh Shapiro presided over all of this because they found a way that through taxpayer dollars, they could attain political prowess and their political ambitions could be fed. Meanwhile, those of us who live there watch our towns be utterly destroyed from under us while he just seems to get promoted within his own party.
It's so obvious that a teenager could see it. You lived it, uh, and you wrote a letter to the editor saying, "Stop, don't do this." And I think that this is very obvious to most Americans, but it wasn't until Donald Trump that most Americans felt comfortable talking about these things. We're still being, canceled and intimidated with charges of racism, like with your letter. But the reality is, and so this is the big question here, when we import um, 10, 20, 30,000 people into a small town, whether it's from Jamaica or Haiti or Guatemala or El Salvador, Venezuela, wherever it's from. It's not about race, it's about culture. And the thing that I think needs to be said is that these countries do not have a rule of law. They are not There is so much more crime in a third world country because they do not respect the rule of law. The people at the top don't respect it. So why would the people at the bottom? And they're often run by cartels and gangs, and the police are corrupt. And so when they come to small town America that is filled with law-abiding citizens, and you have this peaceful community, everybody's not perfect. It's a fallen world, but they are going to be more criminally minded and acting. Is that politically incorrect?
Well, I don't think that's politically incorrect because I think having a town and a neighborhood that you're surrounded by people who speak the same language as you, who share the same values as you, that aren't strangers, that are actually neighbors, right? So the reason that our neighbors have become strangers in the past 10 to 15 years, all across the country, by the way, really increasingly since the Biden administration has taken office, this would be, you mentioned Kamala's America, this would be the continuation of this trend of atomization, of breaking down those bonds of the social contract, breaking down those bonds of family, breaking down those bonds of community, breaking down those bonds of church, of religion. Again, and by the way, this goes back to some of the great work. Bowling Alone is one of the great books about this. How you can bowling using bowling alleys where a bowling alley used to be dominated by the bowling league, and men
Right.
and women would go, and Friday night, Saturday night, and this was the huge turnout for it. And it was really part of that civic, it's non-political, obviously nonpartisan, but it was just a huge part of civic life. And then as those neighborhoods died down and as those neighborhoods died out and people had to move around and people were smashed and were scattered to the winds, then people could still go to the bowling alley, but you were bowling alone in the sense that you were doing single bowling. You were not, the bowling leagues were destroyed. And so from an economic standpoint, sure, the town was full, but from a
Cohesion.
personal standpoint, from a
Yeah.
living standpoint, or a social standpoint, there's no cohesion whatsoever. And so I actually go back to the great film "It's a Wonderful Life" with Jimmy Stewart, and I always talk about how if you look at the two visions of the world in depicted in the film, that it's not and Frank Hopper was the director. It's not some, apocalyptic world that he goes into in the world without George Bailey. But when you look at the world of Bedford Falls versus the world of Potterville, Bedford Falls is that high trust society that's predicated on social relationships, whereas Potterville is vice, it's licentiousness, it's gambling, it's prostitution, it's all of the public drunkenness, all of these things are pushed together. And so when you destroy those social bonds, you still have a world, but what you have is a world that's totally predicated again on these personal vices without any real society to put it together. So if you're simply measuring it on in terms of, you were talking before about how they can bring in the low cost labor, like sure, I guess that's going to help the company get a better bottom line, but what it's going to do is destroy the society. And that's the problem that we're facing now across America.
Societies are organisms. There's relationships between the people. And like you said, you played with the kids um, of the parents who had relationships with your parents and going back to grandparents. These, oh, that's that's Bob's son, or that's Bob's great grandson or something. There's relationships where people, just down the street. That my husband came from Paterson, New Jersey, and or Fairlawn rather. He left Paterson, New Jersey, and the people were all the same people that, when we go back after we were married and with kids, 5 kids, we go back and the same people are living in the neighborhoods. These are these old time neighborhoods where relationships were built over a period of time. And I think that the these cities are being destroyed, and I think it's happening probably more across America than we know about. I don't know how many. Do you know how many sanctuary cities we have, or little towns that are refugee resettlement cities?
It's tough to be able to track this because not all of them name it, and also there's certain areas where the county declares itself to be a sanctuary city, and so you've got all of the towns and villages within that. But it's potentially thousands. It's actually potentially thousands.
It's a masterful plan. And to me, when I think about just sort of burning it down and not even leaving the foundation, jackhammer that up and build something all anew. It's I think of the Communist manifesto, abolish the family, abolish private property, abolish um, religion, churches. And what you've got is the family's being abolished. It's been being abolished through various means. Private property is people can't afford to buy homes now. And that you can't afford to repair homes and maintain homes anymore. And also abolishing religion by an influx of I know this is politically incorrect, but too much Islam. We were and should still be a Christian nation at the end of 100 years from now. Will we be a Christian nation any longer if we continue the influx from Islam and voodoo? Right? I mean, now voodoo is a major thing. We, do you think, by the way, that we have um, an obligation to maintain some sort of American cohesion in terms of our religious makeup, and that bringing in too many Muslims and immigrants from voodoo worshiping countries, that's something that we should avoid?
I mean, I think in general that when it comes to any culture that is incompatible with Western society, incompatible with our Western values, the way that we built it. And again, Western society has been built up over millennia. And this is a huge problem that communists have when they cut us off from our history.
Unburdened by what has
Essentially
been.
but right, so unburdened by what has been. So this is the perfect communist response from Kamala Harris that so destroy history, smash the four olds, as Chairman Mao used to say, that when you're cut off from the ideas and the principles that brought us to the society, it makes me think of Chesterton's fence. That G.K. Chesterton had a line where he would essentially, I'll paraphrase it, but yeah, never destroy a rule or never take away a rule until you've understood why the rule is there to begin with.
He
And
said many wise things.
never take down a fence that you don't know why it's there in the first place. And so it's true though. It's absolutely true that we've gone through and we have this sort of belief that they think that, oh, well, if something was set up in a certain way, then it must be bad. It must be wrong. So we should get rid of it. And that's how we can power our way through to the new future.
Progress. Forward.
Forward utopia, the revolutionary utopia, post-revolution, that instead what we're doing is we are actually making the same mistakes that potentially our ancestors made thousands of years ago and have had to deal with since the very idea that we have a society to begin with. And that's why one of the things we talk about in the book in Unhumans is Hammurabi's Code. And of course, people say, well, Hammurabi's Code, eye for an eye. I mean, we've certainly gotten far beyond that. I said, yes, but understand, why was an eye for an eye instituted in the first place, right? And people don't ask the question. Well, an eye for an eye was instituted because prior to that, what did you have? You had tribal warfare. So if someone disrespects me from another tribe, I go back to my tribe, or if someone injures me, etc., I go back to my tribe and we declare war on that tribe and we kill them and murder them and take all their stuff. And you have this massive disproportionate response, whereas an eye for an eye was actually meant as a limiting factor. So again, defense,
Reciprocal.
to say, oh, things will be reciprocal. And this is something we talk about, a concept we talk about a lot in Non-Humans as well, that the idea of reciprocity. And so through reciprocity, then you can have a society, because rather than destroying everything all the time whenever someone does you wrong, you can essentially have a system of law.
Yeah, you go to law. And of course, Moses and is the great lawgiver, and Hammurabi didn't quite have the same code that we have today. So we have Kamala, we have Tim Walz, and I personally believe that if we have a free and fair election, if that's even possible anymore, that it will be potentially like 1984 Reagan, or was that 80 Carter? That it'll be not a clean sweep, but he got 42 states. And I'm wondering how you feel. Do you think that the American electorate is much more on the side of Trump and going to vote for him than are reflected in the polls when we have, 1 or 2 points difference?
No, I do think that, given that America has faced particularly 3 decades now and even more if you go back to the 60s, so many years of this mass migration, that you do end up having an electorate that is very different than what it was in 1980 or 1984, where the demographics of the country have drastically changed over the past 30 years. So unfortunately, I don't think you can have a situation. I mean, look at California. Just through illegal immigration and open borders, California has gone from a state where Reagan, of course, was elected governor, but prior to him, Richard Nixon was elected governor, to a state that is as blue as can be. You will not find a bluer state than California. Texas does look like it's trending in that way as well, although Florida has had a lot of great inroads. I think Florida has benefited a lot because during COVID, I think a lot of the people who were escaping lockdowns ended up moving to Florida. So you had this mass southern migration to Florida. So Do I think that the polls are close? I do. I
You
honestly do,
do.
because I think there's a lot of people in the country now who look at Donald Trump as sort of the politics of the past, and they look at Kamala Harris as the wave of the future. And so they understand that maybe they may have their misgivings about Kamala as a candidate. Obviously, she and Tim Walz are not necessarily very well suited to running, or obviously not to governing. But look at the trend on which they are on. They are on the same trend of breaking down society, handing society over to multinational corporations, breaking down neighborhoods. Again, by the way, none of this applies to their own gated communities and their own
No.
neighborhoods and their own mansions and Martha's Vineyard and the rest of it, right? It just applies to, the other 90% of us, or maybe 99% of us out there who have to live in the country that they have destroyed. It really gets to a point where that's similar to Huxley's Brave New World, where you've got these massive cosmopolitan centers, and then I think they call it the savage lands in the middle.
Well, don't you think that, well, okay. So you're saying it is as close as the polls are reflecting, or it's predominantly so. But what you're thinking so what is your thinking about the outcome of the election? Not that anybody really knows, because we don't know if there's going to be a late October, early November surprise. But are you think we're moving toward a Trump victory? It seems to me that the momentum is
Well,
with him.
I think the momentum is with Trump. However, the security issues that he faces are grave, and I think basically it's something like this. With Kamala being where she is in the polls, I think that at this point, it's Trump's to win if he makes it out of the campaign alive. And again, in the New York Times and the Washington Post today, they just broke the story that his security threats are so grave that the campaign has actually requested assistance from the Department of Defense, and they're pleading with the Biden administration to give them the unprecedented level of security, because they're talking about facing threats potentially from abroad, potentially internal domestic threats. This guy who was connected to Ukrainian foreign fighters just tried to kill him at his West Palm Beach golf course, and so they're requesting military aircraft and military convoys to vehicles to be essentially able to transport him around from campaign stop to campaign stop, as well as JD Vance, and also even looking at using decoy air. They're already
Using
using
decoys.
decoy aircraft, and so
On one
people don't realize
RPG
that
and
it's
it's over, right? One RPG
or a
and it's
drone.
or
A
drone.
drone would even be more effective than an RPG, because a drone is it's easier to build. You could make one, you can buy them commercially, you get a drone, you essentially what they're doing now, and we've learned this, or I should say it has been learned, that's not something I've learned, that they use this on the battlefield in Ukraine to great effect. Both sides, they're taking the IED, which was the most powerful weapon in the global war on terror, and then they're adding the advent of drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, first-person drones, and first-person view drones and IEDs, welding them together so you can make something in your garage that's enough to be able to take down an airplane, take down a person, kill someone. Again, at the Butler rally, the shooter flew a drone, whereas the Secret Service's drone was not able to be flown. Although I will have to say, I was at the second Butler rally here on October 5th, just about 6 days ago, a week from tomorrow. And there were two law enforcement drones that were flying overhead during that rally, one in front of the stage and one behind everything. So there were two drones up. But had that shooter used a drone on January 13th, if he had just strapped an IED to it rather than attempt to take the shot, I think that more than likely he would have been able to kill President Trump on live TV.
You know, it doesn't matter how many laws you have. If the culture is so divided and the uh, the the discourse is so toxic, and I see it coming almost virtually 100% from the left. I mean, killers always seem to come out, in their background and their manifestos and everything, back to the Unabomber, an environmentalist, right? I mean, they are leftists. They're generally leftists. I don't know what percentage is, but if the culture goes from that Norman Rockwell America, where we had this social contract, you don't fly drones with IEDs into your presidents, right? Um, but once you strip that away, and so many of your people are also foreign born, and so many people are, you've just lost that social cohesion. I don't know how you stop it. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, like, how do you stop people from political opponents from being killed by drone carrying IED carrying drones, or drones carrying IEDs? How do you stop this kind of thing? Do we have the technology that it could be ubiquitous?
Well, the technology to counter drone technology essentially is through electronic warfare, and as a Navy officer, that's something that we learned about. Obviously, tech is always going to be tech versus counter tech sort of fight, weapon
Right.
counter weapon movement sort of fight that's always going on throughout all of the history of mankind. But the real threat though is again the Secret Service, the Department of Homeland Security. They've got to get it right every time. President Trump's personal detail. I certainly hope that he gets a military detail very soon here, because quite frankly, I don't trust the Secret Service after what we saw from
No, I don't
Steele,
either.
after what we saw from Ron Rowe. And I've got all the documents in the new book in bulletproof that we have leaked. By the way, the unredacted report, the after action report, we've got in the new book, so people can go, and when they check that out, they'll see the unredacted report and just see the fact that the Secret Service was not talking to local law enforcement. They weren't talking to the snipers. They weren't talking to anyone sharing information. They lied repeatedly to Congress about when they knew that the shooter was there, when they knew that he had a rangefinder, when they were actually in active pursuit of this person of interest for up to 27 minutes. And the simple question, I've done a number of presidential rallies and presidential visits, even overseas presidential visits, where it takes 2 seconds to say simply, hey, stay behind the stage until we deal with a situation that we have going on. It would have been the most obvious thing
A natural
to
thing.
do. And yet, when they questioned Secret Service about this, the counter sniper said it didn't cross his mind. Said it didn't occur to him. And so we put this into my co-author and I, Joshua Lysek, on Bulletproof, who also co-wrote Unhumans with me. When we put this into GPT-4 Omni, which is the latest from OpenAI, we put in the 12 what we call the independent security failures that ran through that day. And we said, what are the odds of these 12 independent security failures taking place on the same day that a gunman with malicious intent attempted to kill President Trump? And it gave us an answer of 1 in 1 septillion were the odds that came out, which is the same idea as you flipping a coin and calling it heads or tails, and the coin coming up heads 97 times in a row. That's the same odds there. And so, and actually GPT-4 Omni told us directly that because of the severe unlikelihood of this probability occurring, then it is less likely that this happened by chance.
I don't see it as happened by chance. I wouldn't immediately in the first 5 minutes say there's a conspiracy here or there's malfeasance um, on the part of the security service. But, after seeing, even just within a few days, you could see that there was a tremendous problem. And I think that there's malintent there. I don't know whose malintent, but do you have any opinions about that, or do you want to just let the facts lay there? And
I'll just say hypothetically, if so, connect everything that we've talked about, that if you have billions of dollars and pressure on the line to stop President Trump, if you have a military industrial complex that you want to continue on, if you have these multinational corporations working to turn the United States through the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset into an economic zone, and you've attempted to censor Trump, you've attempted to pull him from the ballot, you've attempted to stop him from running, you've attempted to put him in jail and indict him and convict him and raid his home and his wife's home, his wife's personal room and her drawers, and all of that hasn't been able to stop him. Then what would you do next? What would be the
well,
final
there's
step
only one
that you would
choice.
take?
If you had to take the next step, there's only one choice that I can think of. And because they've tried everything else, humiliation, taking away his freedom. destroying his presidencies, or through, so many lawfare projects and impeachment projects that it's so surprising that he was able to accomplish what he did, demoralizing his following, accusing them. Um, they've tried everything, and there really is. But I do want to be cautious to say this, that should anybody be listening, and this is not a suggestion, we're saying that if you're looking at motivations and goals, um, there seems to be a motivation behind these attempts, and it's just to stop. It's not random. It's not random. Do you think it's a deep state? I mean, I hate to be so um, to throw it out there so bluntly, but just, do you think it's intelligence forces,
Well,
or
when we look at the first situation, we know that obviously President Trump was not given the level of support that he needed. But the second one here is that we know that this individual on the second attempt, Ryan Wesley Routh, was directly connected to the Azov Battalion. The Azov Battalion is a CIA-backed,
yeah,
CIA-trained neo-Nazi ideology battalion
that's right.
that's taken the forefront of the Ukraine war, even going all the way back to 2014 when they were conducting operations in the Donbass. Now up into, they've been made part of the formal Ukrainian military and Ukrainian armed forces, and so they are directly tied. And I was able to use an AI program to identify, and people could see this on my Twitter account, that we were able to identify this individual, Ryan Wesley Routh, by using AI to scour the internet once we had his image. And one of the first videos that popped up was a recruitment and fundraising video for the Azov Battalion. We didn't even know who this guy was, and
Right.
we're in
I reposted that.
Azov Battalion video, which is not the first thing that had come to mind, but certainly doesn't surprise me that we find out later that this is a guy directly tied to foreign fighters who attempted to bring Afghan fighters from Afghanistan after the end of that to Ukraine, was not able to get funding to do so. But in the course of this, had traveled to Istanbul, Turkey, had gone to Taipei, Taiwan, had been traveling all over the world working with these foreign fighter operations. And this wouldn't be the first time that we've seen U.S. national security activities around the world come back to kind of snake bite us in the backfield here in the United States. So suddenly you've got a guy who was a member of the Ukrainian foreign fighters who had received training on the battlefield in Ukraine, has come back to the United States, is attempting to get involved in our political affairs through political assassination, and taking out, by the way, the one person who he believes is against Ukraine because he's so committed to the cause there.
RFK said he was going to send jets to Israel, and Saran was a Palestinian Arab, or an Arab Palestinian, and that's why he was going after RFK Sr. And so, um, and he had been somewhat of a supporter of his before, actually very much so, but he had to die because he wasn't doing the right political thing. As far as foreign actors, I had a worker, because we had a flood yesterday, and I'm not in a flood zone, I'm just outside of DC, but we had a flood in this very tall house, and we had workers in our house, all kinds of workers. And I spoke to one young man, and my 89-year-old mother grills everybody who walks through the door because she's going to do her bit at getting the word out and getting people registered and voting. And so do I. So we grill everybody who walks through the door, and we send them out voting for Trump and registered. But this young man said, well, I hear that there's going to be perhaps terrorism around polling places. And I saw that you had posted about a federal bulletin that had been released to law enforcement, warning of election day and post-election violence from those enthralled with the Russia-Ukraine war. And then we also saw this Afghanistan um, migrant um, planning for violence as well. And I told this young man, I said, look, I said, don't worry. You get out there and you vote. Do not worry about polling place violence. That what we need is voters and to do our American duty. Do you think anybody has to worry about going out to vote because of foreign fighters, either people who are enthralled by the Ukraine-Russia war or Afghanis coming here too?
I do think that, really what it is that we have a number of ways to vote now. In Pennsylvania, there's early voting where I'm from. And so my mother has actually already voted. I've been joking with that with people. Hey, my mom could vote before you. How come you can't vote yet? And I know Kerry Lake has voted early in Arizona. This is a great way to mitigate this problem. But that
Right.
being said, what I take that law enforcement bulletin to mean, and again, reported to me by a federal official, that essentially they are looking at other potential Ryan Wesley Rouths who may be out there. And Matt Gaetz came on my program and said Homeland Security was telling him that there were 5 assassination teams targeting
That's
President
right.
Trump. And what better way, if you can't get Trump himself, to stop him or hurt his chances than by going after his supporters? And it's a horrible thought. It's a dark thought. But we have to think this way because President Trump is facing active threats. That's why Joshua Lysek and myself put together the book Bulletproof, and everyone can go get it at Amazon.
Absolutely. Get the
That it
book.
is,
And rate it, by the
it's,
way, because it'll be downrated.
well,
I just
thank
had
you.
Stephen
Yes, that's
Moore
right.
on about the Trump economic miracle, and he said they've got people in there deliberately down rating on Amazon. And so I'm encouraging everybody to buy the book from Amazon by Jack.